They stand beneath blinding lights, smiling as if the world is weightless. Their movements are sharp, their voice is steady, their presence flawless. On stage, SB19 look untouchable, like perfection given form. But beyond the applause, beyond the cameras and carefully framed moments, there is another story. A story rarely told. A story hidden behind discipline, sacrifice, and silence. The world sees victory. They feel the cost. Every breath measured. Every note rehearsed until it aches. Every emotion carefully contained. Because perfection is not just expected, it is demanded. And what happens when perfection becomes the heaviest mask a star can wear? Tonight, we step beyond the spotlight to uncover the truth behind SB19's journey, the sleepless nights, the quiet battles, the unseen price of appearing flawless. This is SB19, the true cost of perfection. Before the awards, before the sold-out arenas, before the chance of their name, SB19 were simply 5 young men with a shared dream. No guarantees. No shortcuts. Only belief. They walked into a studio carrying uncertainty, fear, and hope in equal measure. They were not born into privilege or fame. Their path was built from rejection, doubt, and relentless work. Brick by brick. Note by note. Failure by failure. Training days turned into training nights. Criticism became routine. Progress was slow and often invisible. But they stayed when walking away would have been easier. The Philippines had never seen a group like them. So disciplined. So precise. So determined to prove that Filipino talent deserved a place on the world stage. When SB19 finally debuted, it wasn't just a performance. It was a declaration. P-pop was no longer a concept. It was a movement. And SB19 stood at its center. Every step they took was deliberate. Every lyric carefully shaped. Every glance calculated, not for vanity, but for excellence. They weren't chasing perfection by accident. They chose it. As their popularity rose, so did something far less visible. Expectation. At first, it felt like pride. Then pressure. Then something heavier. The cheers grew louder. The stages grew bigger. And perfection stopped being admired, it became required. Every comeback had to be better than the last. Every dance sharper. Every vocal stronger. Emotion had to feel real, yet remain controlled. The cameras captured confidence. They never captured exhaustion. Behind every flawless performance were aching muscles, shaking knees, and minds running on too little sleep. But none of that mattered once the lights came on. Perfection was no longer a goal. It became a prison built from praise. One mistake. One offbeat step. One cracked note. That was all it took for criticism to spread across screens within seconds. The internet celebrated their highs, but punished their lows without mercy. Slowly, SB19 realized a painful truth. The same love that lifted them was also chaining them to impossible standards. They were no longer just performing. They were surviving. And still, they smiled. Still, they delivered. Because when millions are watching, falling is not an option. Perfection always comes at a cost. For SB19, it meant giving up the life most young men their age lived freely. While others celebrated birthdays at home, SB19 spent theirs in rehearsal rooms. Holidays blurred into practice sessions. Sleep became optional. Rest became rare. Injuries were ignored. Pain became routine. Fatigue was hidden behind laughter and discipline. They learned to trade comfort for consistency. Joy for repetition. Silence for strength. And in rare quiet moments, between rehearsals and performances, they wondered what it would feel like to exist without being judged. To breathe without pressure. To fail without consequence. The world saw perfection. It never saw the loneliness behind it. SB19 didn't just polish their craft. They sacrificed their peace. As success grew, so did the weight they carried. Every achievement raised the bar higher. Every victory became a new expectation to surpass. They were no longer just artists. They had become symbols. Symbols of Filipino excellence. Symbols of discipline. Symbols of national pride. Fans wanted inspiration. Critics demanded consistency. The media expected perfection always. Even rest was examined. A tired expression could spark rumors. A single misstep could trend worldwide. They learned to guard every movement, every word, every expression. Because one imperfect moment could undo years of work. And quietly, the question began to echo within them. Is perfection still worth it if it costs who we are? Their success became a golden cage admired from the outside, suffocating within. When perfection becomes your identity, even a small flaw feels like failure. Every step on stage carried silent fear. Fear of disappointing fans. Fear of letting their country down. Fear of not living up to the standard they themselves had created. The pressure tested more than their skills. It tested their spirit. They began measuring their worth through flawless performances. The stage that once felt alive slowly turned into a battlefield where survival replaced celebration. And yet, they kept going. Because for SB19, quitting was never an option. Not when dreams, loyalty, and national pride rested on their shoulders. But deep inside, the question grew louder. What happens when passion turns into punishment? When the lights dimmed and the cameras shut off, reality took over. Away from the crowds, exhaustion became undeniable. Bodies slumped against studio walls. Smiles faded into silence. Laughter masked pain too heavy to speak aloud. There were moments when no one talked, not because everything was fine, but because everyone was tired. And still, they stood, because of each other. Pablo's leadership held them steady. Stel's energy reignited fading spirits. Josh's resilience pushed them forward. Ken's calm grounded the chaos. Justin's warmth softened the weight. Behind the perfection were 5 human beings holding one another through breakdowns no camera ever saw. They knew the world would only see the final product. They accepted that. Because for SB19, this was never just a performance. It was purpose. But perfection has a way of blurring lines. Between passion and pain. Between love and obligation. Even stars need space to breathe. Chasing perfection for too long drains the color from a dream. Music that once felt like freedom began to feel like responsibility. Applause turned into pressure. Songs became routines. Until something shifted. They realized the truth their fans had always known. People didn't love SB19 because they were perfect. They loved them because they were real. In the unfiltered moments, a laugh after a misstep, a tear during a song, a voice that trembled, connection was born. Fans didn't fall in love with machines. They connected with dreamers who dared to be human. SB19's journey became proof that greatness isn't about meeting every expectation. It's about staying true, even when the crown is heavy. Their scars became symbols, not of weakness, but of survival. And when they stepped back into the spotlight, something had changed. They were no longer chasing flawless images. They were embracing honesty. Not perfect idols. But real artists. And in that truth, the world finally saw what perfection truly looks like. Imperfection, embraced with pride. This is SB19, the true price of being perfect. And this story isn't just theirs. It belongs to everyone chasing greatness, carrying dreams heavier than they appear. If this story moved you, tap like, share it forward, and subscribe. Because stories like SB19's deserve to be heard. Yet they kept moving forward. Because for SB19, failure was never an option, not when dreams, fans, and a nation's pride rested on their shoulders. But the question grew louder. What happens when passion turns into punishment? When the lights dimmed and cameras shut off, the real struggle emerged. Away from roaring crowds, exhaustion took center stage. Sore bodies leaned against studio walls. Laughter masked overwork. Silence filled rooms. Not with peace, but with fatigue too heavy to voice. Still, their brotherhood held them together. Pablo's leadership grounded them. Stell's energy reignited the room. Josh's resilience, Ken's calm, and Justin's warmth kept them standing. Behind the perfection were 5 souls holding each other through sleepless nights and quiet breakdowns. They knew the world would only see the polished result, never the tears behind it. But they didn't complain, because this was more than performance. It was purpose. Yet perfection blurred the line between passion and pain. Even stars need space to breathe. When perfection is chased for too long, the dream that once gave life begins to fade. For SB19, music once meant freedom, now it felt like obligation. Applause turned into pressure. Melodies became routines. Until they realized something powerful. Fans didn't love them for being flawless. They loved them for being human. In raw moments. A laugh after a misstep, a tear mid-performance, SB19 rediscovered their purpose. People don't connect with machines. They connect with dreamers who dare to feel. SB19's journey became proof that success isn't about meeting every expectation, it's about staying true, even when the crown is heavy. Their scars became symbols of strength, not weakness. And when they returned to the spotlight, not as perfect idols, but as honest artists, the world finally understood what true perfection looks like. Imperfection embraced with pride.